Are you worried about nuclear war, the possibility of nuclear war?
I think it's necessary to pay attention to that possibility. That possibility existed before the February 2022 full-blown invasion of Ukraine. The doomsday arsenal that Russia possesses is enough to destroy the world many times over, and that's been the case every year since the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991. And so, of course, we're concerned about that. We do know, however, Lex, that they have a system known as dual key. Dual key for their strategic nuclear weapons. Strategic nuclear weapons means the ones fired from silos, the missiles, the ones delivered from bombers, or the ones fired from submarines, right?
And they're ready to go.
They're intercontinental. We watch that very, very closely. We watch all the movement of that and the alerts, etc. We have tremendously, let's say, tremendous inside intelligence on that. But dual key means that President Putin alone cannot fire them. He has one key which he must insert. He must then insert the codes for a command to launch. That then goes to the head of the general staff, who has his own key and separate codes and must do the same, insert that key and codes for them to launch. And so will the general staff chief go along with the destruction of the world over a battlefield loss in Ukraine? I don't know the answer to that, and I don't know if anybody knows the answer to that. Will those people flying those bombers, if they get the order if the dual key system goes into action, and both keys are used and all the codes are implemented, will those young guys flying those bombers let those bombs go? Will those at the missile silos decide to engage and fire? We don't know, but you can see that it's more than one man making the decision here in a system of strategic nuclear weapons. As far as the tactical, the so-called low-yield or battlefield nuclear weapons, we're not sure the system that they have in Russia these days for their use of such tactical nuclear weapons. It could well be that Putin and just himself, he alone can fire them or order them be fired. But you know, Lex, there's no tactical nuclear weapon fired at Ukraine that's not also fired simultaneously at Russia. If the Kremlin is 600 miles from Ukraine, and if the wind changes direction, or the wind happens to be blowing east, northeast, the fallout hits your Kremlin, not just Ukraine. Moreover, you have all those border regions, which are staging regions for the Russian offensive, and they're a lot closer than 600 miles. They're actually right there. And so you fire that weapon on Ukrainian territory and you can get the fallout, just like the Chernobyl fallout, spread to Sweden, which is how we got the Kremlin to finally, first they denied, they said, oh, we don't know why there's a big nuclear cloud over Sweden. We don't know where that came from. But eventually they admitted it. So Russia can't actually use a nuclear weapon, tactical battlefield one in Ukraine, without also firing it at itself. And in addition, it's that same dynamic I alluded to earlier, which is to say, you bomb a hospital, you bomb a school, there's more heavy weapons going to Ukraine from the West.
You can't get away with any of there's always going to be a response that's either proportional or greater than proportional.
You could well have Europe signing on to NATO direct engagement, both Washington and Brussels direct engagement of the Russian army on the territory of Ukraine.
You think that's possible to do that without dramatic escalation from the Russian side?
Yes, I do think it's possible, but it's very worrisome, just like you're saying. But if Putin were to escalate like that, he's firing that weapon at himself, and he's potentially provoking a direct clash with NATO's military, not just with the Ukrainian military. If you're sitting in the Kremlin looking at those charts, Lex, of NATO capabilities, and you can't conquer Ukraine, which didn't really have heavy weapons before February 2022 at scale, and you're thinking, okay, now I'm going to take on NATO, that would be a bold step on the part of a Russian leader. And let's also remember, Lex, that there's another variable here. You're a despot as long as everyone implements your orders. And so if people start to say quietly, not necessarily publicly, I may not implement that order because that's maybe a criminal order, or my grandma is Ukrainian, or my wife is Ukrainian, or I don't want to go to The Hague. I don't want to spend the rest of my life in The Hague, or whatever it might be. At any point along the chain of command, from the general staff all the way down, right, to the platoon, you're a despot provided they implement your orders. But who's to say that somewhere along the chain of command, people start to say, you know, I'm going to ignore that order, or I'm going to sabotage that order, or I'm going to flee the battlefield, or I'm going to injure myself so that I don't have to fight, or I'm going to join the Ukrainian side. And so it could be that's what's left of the Russian army in the field begins to disintegrate. Even if the Ukrainians are not able to mount that counteroffensive at scale, that combined arms operation, the Russian military in the field, which has taken horrendous casualties as far as we understand, something like a third of the original force. So you're talking about 50 to 60,000. That includes both dead and wounded to the point of being unable to return to the battlefield. Those are big numbers. Those were a lot of families affected. Their sons or their husbands or their fathers are either missing in action, or the regime won't tell them that they're dead, as you know from the sinking of that flagship Moskva, right, by the Ukrainians. And so a disintegration of the Russian military because there are orders that they either can't implement or don't want to implement is also not excluded. And so you have these two big variables, the Ukrainian army in the field and its ability to move from defense to offense at scale. And we're going to test that soon. And then the Russian ability in the field to hold together in a war of conquest and aggression, where they're conscripts, or they're fed dog food, or they don't have any weapons anymore because there's no resupply. And so the disintegration of the army can't be excluded. And then, of course, all bets are off on the Putin regime. More long term, there are these technology export controls. We were talking about how the military-industrial complex in Russia is dependent on foreign component parts and software. And so if you have export controls and you have firms voluntarily, even when they don't fall under export controls, leaving Russian business, refusing to do business with Russia, and we see this not just in the civilian sector, like with McDonald's or many other companies, we see this in the key areas like the oil industry, with the executives fleeing. That is, the Western executives fleeing, giving up their positions. So Russia's ability to resupply its tanks, resupply its missiles, resupply its uniforms, resupply its food to its soldiers in the field and their boots. We see a lot of stuff under tremendous stress, and in the long term, there's no obvious way they can rebuild the military-industrial complex to produce those weapons because they're reliant on foreign parts that they can't get anymore, and there are no domestic substitutes on the immediate horizon. That's at the earliest a 2-year proposition to have domestic substitutes. And for some things like microelectronics, They've never had domestic substitutes going back to the Soviet times, as you know well. And so there's that pressure on Russia from the technology export controls, which, if you're in the security ministry or the defense ministry, if you're in that side of the regime, you're feeling that pain as we speak, and you're wondering about the strategy.